I once swore I'd hate Xu Feng for the rest of my life, ever since the day he snatched the one scholarship spot right out from under me. And yet here I am now, tucked against his chest, my hand trembling as I hold a photo someone snapped of us in the middle of the night. I couldn't even tell who was holding who tighter. Only 4 dorm room walls stood between us, but what scared me most wasn't this feeling quietly growing between us. It was an acceptance letter on its way, one powerful enough to force one of us to leave the other behind for good. The night after our last exam, the whole class headed to a barbecue place near school to celebrate. I could never hold my liquor well, but my friends pushed round after round on me until my head was spinning before I even noticed. Vaguely, I remember someone hauling me up from my chair, an arm wrapping around my shoulder to keep me from falling. The familiar scent of mint hit my nose, Xu Feng. He didn't say a word, just quietly carried me out of the restaurant on his back while the whole table hooted and whistled behind us. I meant to protest, but my body wouldn't listen. My head slumped against his back, and I drifted off somewhere along the way back to the dorm. I woke up the next morning to my phone buzzing non-stop. Dozens of messages had piled up, all asking the same question: since when had Xu Feng and I been dating? Panicked, I opened the school confession page and found a blurry photo of him carrying me on his back the night before, captioned with something coy about the faculty's secret couple. The comments had already climbed to nearly 200, full of wild guesses. I sat bolt upright, my heart pounding, not from fear, but from some strange feeling creeping in, fear and excitement tangled together, one even I couldn't quite explain. I rushed over to Xu Feng's side of the room to clear up the misunderstanding, but froze the moment I opened the door. My things in our shared corner had been neatly rearranged, books lined up exactly the way I liked them, a glass of water set within reach. The blanket and pillow folded the way I preferred, not the way he usually did. I stood there, stunned, wondering since when Xu Feng had started noticing such small details about me. A strange, uneasy feeling rose in my chest, and I decided I'd demand an explanation the second he got back. Xu Feng walked in, saw me waiting, and just raised an eyebrow, asking what was wrong. I held up my phone, pointed at the photo and the pile of comments, and demanded to know how he planned to explain this to everyone. Xu Feng glanced at the screen and replied coolly that he'd rather let them talk. It saved him the trouble of dealing with the crowd who kept chasing after me. I froze at his answer. I hadn't expected he had no intention of setting the record straight. Worse, he actually seemed pleased with the whole situation. I pressed further, my voice sharper, wanting to know what exactly was going through his head, letting a rumor like this spread unchecked. Xu Feng sat down, still holding his book, and simply said the rumor mattered less than having a quiet room. His roundabout answer only annoyed me more. I remembered the hazy feeling from the night before, a hand gripping tight around my waist the whole way home. I still couldn't tell whether someone had really held me that close, or if it had just been a drunken illusion. Unable to hold back, I asked him outright whether he'd taken advantage of me while I was drunk. Xu Feng looked up, his eyes darkening for a moment, but he said nothing, just turned back to his book as if he hadn't heard the question at all. That silence unsettled me more than any denial would have. I stood frozen in the middle of the room for a long while before finally giving up and retreating to my own bed, my thoughts a tangled mess, unsure what to believe. The next afternoon, our floor monitor called our room in to remind us that someone had reported noise coming from our room past 11 the night before. I was baffled. I'd been dead asleep the entire night and had no idea any noise had happened. A neighbor let it slip that there hadn't actually been any noise at all. Xu Feng had simply stood guard outside our door all night, refusing to let anyone in, not even the dorm staff on their routine check. I turned to ask Xu Feng why he'd done that. Did he think I'd get robbed or something? He answered flatly, without a trace of hesitation, that he was just worried someone might come near me while I wasn't sober enough to protect myself. His words made my heart skip a beat. I quickly looked away, telling myself it was just his usual, irrational possessiveness. nothing worth dwelling on. That afternoon, I sat with a few classmates in the cafeteria, and the conversation drifted back to Xu Feng. One of them murmured that, ever since freshman year, Xu Feng had always paid attention to everything involving me, even though he acted cold and distant on the surface. I brushed it off immediately, insisting firmly that we were nothing more than old rivals forced together by a dorm assignment glitch. Nothing more to it. Late that night, I scrolled back through the confession page to check if the comments had died down. I was surprised to see a new notice. The post had been taken down at the request of the person involved, along with an apology for the trouble caused to Yu. I stared at those words for a long moment. So Xu Feng had quietly reached out to the admins to get it removed, without ever telling me, leaving me to discover it on my own like this. I grabbed my phone and went over to Xu Feng's side, meaning to ask why he'd acted so indifferent earlier, but had quietly gone and taken the post down that night. He was sitting there studying. Hearing the door open, he looked up at me, his expression calm as if nothing had happened. I held up my phone and asked outright. Xu Feng just shrugged and said it was annoying, so he'd ask them to take it down, nothing to make a fuss over. That offhand answer stirred an unfamiliar warmth in my chest, one I'd never felt before. I hesitated for a moment before asking further, was it because he was worried I'd be embarrassed? Xu Feng closed his book, looked straight at me, and said he simply didn't want anyone looking at me with mocking eyes behind my back. His unexpectedly serious answer left me flustered, unsure how to respond. I ended up dodging the subject, asking some random question about our group project just to hide the confusion rising inside me. A few days later, the academic office posted a notice about the next semester's exchange scholarship, open to eligible third-year students. I stood in front of the board, reading it over and over, an unpleasant memory from freshman year suddenly resurfacing. Xu Feng stood beside me, reading the same notice, his expression darkening for just a second before returning to normal. I glanced at him, wondering if he was thinking about the exact same thing I was. That night I lay in bed, listening to the sound of Xu Feng flipping through his book on the other side of the room, my mind still tangled up with the old scholarship business. I turned to ask if he was planning to apply again this time, but by the time I opened my mouth, I found he'd already fallen asleep at his desk. I quietly got up and draped a blanket over his shoulders, careful not to make a sound. Looking at his face, rarely this relaxed while he slept, I found myself standing there a while longer before finally going back to my own bed. The next morning, I found a cup of coffee made exactly to my taste waiting on my desk, along with a hastily scrawled note. "You slept sitting up last night, don't nag me about it." I picked up the note, the corner of my mouth curling up despite myself. With the old scholarship business still nagging at me, I told myself I needed to sort things out with Xu Feng soon. But looking at his messy handwriting in front of me, I knew I was already losing the distance I'd once kept between us. Standing in front of the scholarship notice, memories from freshman year came flooding back, vivid and unwelcome. Back then, the department only had a single exchange slot, and in the end, only Xu Feng and I made it to the final interview round, competing head-to-head for that one position. We'd both spent months preparing meticulously, each fully aware of who our rival was. Back then, I'd never even had a real conversation with Xu Feng. I only knew him through our sharp clashes in class and group discussions. On the day results were announced, the whole class gathered in front of the board, waiting. Xu Feng's name was called first, winning by the slimmest of margins, just half a point ahead of me in the interview score. I stood frozen in the crowd, my ears ringing, barely able to make out the congratulations around me. The pity in my classmates' eyes only made the weight of losing heavier. Xu Feng walked past, about to say something, but I'd already turned and walked away first. I didn't want to hear any comfort, especially not from the very rival who'd just beaten me. From that day on, I kept telling myself Xu Feng had simply gotten lucky, not that he was actually better than me. Every time we crossed paths on campus, I made a point of being cold, avoiding conversation, even though we shared almost every major class for 2 straight years. Xu Feng never made an effort to smooth things over either, keeping the same distance in return. That quiet resentment simmered on, never boiling over into an argument, but never resolved either, not until the room assignment incident in our 3rd year. At the start of our 3rd year, the dorm assignment system suffered a major glitch, scrambling the entire old room list. I got a notice moving me to a new room, and my heart sank the moment I saw the name listed right beside mine, Xu Feng. Neither of us said a word when we ran into each other at the door on move-in day, silently unpacking our own corners. A suffocating tension hung over the room all afternoon, as if we were both trying to avoid setting off some ticking bomb. I went straight to the dorm office to request a room change, refusing to spend the whole year living with my old rival. But when I got there, the staff on duty told me Xu Feng had already submitted and had approved a request to keep the room as is. I stood frozen at the counter, unable to understand why he'd want to stay in the same room with me. The question nagged at me the whole way back, making me even more irritated that I couldn't guess his real motive. That night, I asked Xu Feng outright why he'd requested to keep the room, given how far from friendly our relationship was. He didn't even look up from his book, just answered flatly that it was more convenient to keep track of my progress on our group project this way. His nonchalant answer left me choking on my own frustration, with nothing concrete to argue back. I gave up and retreated to my bed, telling myself that as long as I kept enough distance, I could survive the year without too much friction. In the days that followed, I gradually noticed Xu Feng remembered my daily schedule with strange precision, even though we'd never once talked about it directly. He knew what time I usually stayed up until, what I liked for breakfast, which perfume scents I couldn't stand. Whenever I asked how he knew my habits so well, Xu Feng would just shrug and say living together long enough made it obvious, nothing surprising about it. I didn't argue further, but something about it still felt hard to explain. Some nights I'd stay up until dawn working on my project, my eyes heavy with exhaustion. The next morning I'd always find a cup of coffee made exactly to my taste waiting on my desk, still warm as if freshly brewed. Xu Feng never once brought it up as if it were simply something he was supposed to do. I'd pick up the coffee and drink it, a strange warmth rising in my chest, though I kept telling myself not to read too much into every little gesture. Despite being quietly taken care of like this, I still made a point of staying cold towards Xu Feng whenever I got the chance. Every time I looked at him, the memory of that scholarship announcement from freshman year surfaced vividly, and I couldn't easily let go of the old resentment. I told myself that no matter how considerate he was in day-to-day life, that old wound wasn't so easy to erase. So I kept just enough distance, not overly cold, but never truly open with him either. One afternoon, while tidying our shared desk, I accidentally knocked a stack of old papers out of Xu Feng's drawer. Picking them up to put them back, my eyes caught a few familiar lines. It was the draft of his scholarship essay from freshman year. I skimmed through it and found a passage about his family's difficult circumstances, the heavy tuition burden for his younger sister still in high school, the reason he'd had to win that scholarship at any cost to ease the load on his family. I sat frozen on the floor for a long time, the stack of papers still clutched in my hands. All this time I'd believed Xu Feng only won that year because he'd gotten a little lucky, never once considering the heavy pressure behind that victory. The resentment I'd carried for 2 years suddenly felt small and selfish in my eyes. I quietly put the papers back exactly where I'd found them, telling myself I'd probably misjudged and unfairly resented Xu Feng for far too long. That evening, I went to the supermarket near school and bought a few packs of mango-flavored snacks, the kind I knew Xu Feng secretly liked to eat late at night while working. Back in the room, I quietly set the bag on his desk and pretended nothing had happened. I didn't offer a word of explanation, just sat back down at my own desk and got back to work as usual. Deep down, I knew this was the only way I could think of to apologize for all the pointless coldness I'd shown him. Xu Feng came back, saw the bag of snacks on his desk, picked it up, his eyes flashing with surprise. He turned and asked bluntly if I was trying to bribe him, his tone as teasing as ever, though the corner of his mouth had already curled up, unable to hide it. I pretended to be absorbed in my computer screen, mumbling some evasive answer that didn't quite make sense. Xu Feng didn't press further, just quietly opened the snacks and started eating at his desk, occasionally glancing over at me before ducking his head to hide his smile. From that day on, the air in our room gradually grew lighter. We still bickered over little things every day, fighting over who got the bathroom first, arguing about music playing too loud while studying. But those arguments now carried a different color than before. Gone was the deliberate coldness of the early days, replaced by a quiet closeness we both understood but neither of us had put into words. I started looking forward to those evenings spent studying together in the same room with Xu Feng. But just as I was settling into this new rhythm, the dating rumor from that blurry photo the night of the celebration hit, throwing everything between us into awkwardness again. I looked at Xu Feng, sitting there studying as if none of it bothered him at all, but I knew better. Behind that calm mask, he was facing the same unresolved question I was. Was that rumor really just a misunderstanding, or had it accidentally touched on feelings neither of us had dared to name yet? A few days later, Lu Chen, a senior exchange student mentoring our group's graduation project, came to find me at the lab. He'd caught wind of the rumor on the confession page and asked with genuine concern whether it had affected me much. Embarrassed, I assured him it was just a small misunderstanding, nothing to worry about. Lu Chen smiled and suggested that if I was free that evening, we could grab dinner to help me unwind. His gentle tone made it hard for me to turn him down. I agreed without giving it much thought, treating it as nothing more than an ordinary meal between a junior and his mentor. But just as I turned back toward my desk, I caught sight of a familiar figure standing right in the doorway of the lab. Xu Feng had been standing there for who knows how long, a folder of documents still in hand, his eyes fixed unblinking on me and Lu Chen. I had no idea how much of our conversation he'd overheard. I only saw his expression darken for a moment before he turned and walked away. Back in the room that night, the atmosphere between Xu Feng and me was unusually tense. He sat at his desk, pen in hand, but his eyes never once landed on the page, only kept flicking over toward me every time I moved. Finally, he set his pen down and asked, without any preamble, whether I'd made plans to have dinner with Lu Chen. His tone was nothing like usual, each word heavy, as if he were forcing himself to hold something back. I couldn't understand why he cared so much, so I answered coolly on purpose that yes, I had plans, so what? My reply only poured fuel on the fire. I saw his jaw clench tight for a split second. He didn't say another word, just shot up from his chair, slammed the wardrobe door shut with a bang, and walked straight out of the room, leaving me standing there, stunned, in the sudden, suffocating silence. Xu Feng didn't come back to the room all night. I lay in bed tossing and turning, unable to sleep, my ears straining for the sound of footsteps in the hallway, even as I kept telling myself I didn't care where he was. By near dawn, I still hadn't managed to close my eyes, just staring blankly at the ceiling. A vague uneasiness crept through me, irritating me at myself. I couldn't understand why something this small was keeping me up all night. Near dawn, I heard the door creak open. Xu Feng walked in with dark circles under his eyes from staying up all night, looking far more exhausted than usual. He didn't say a single word to me, just quietly set a bag of breakfast on my desk. I glanced at the bag and realized it was exactly the breakfast I liked, from a place quite a distance from the dorm. Without waiting for me to say anything, Xu Feng turned and walked straight into the bathroom, leaving me staring after him, bewildered. I sat there staring at the breakfast on my desk for a long while, my thoughts a tangled mess, unable to make sense of Xu Feng. Just hours ago, he'd stormed off angry and hadn't come back all night, and yet here he was, quietly preparing a thoughtful breakfast as if nothing had happened. That silent care only left me more confused about my own feelings. I picked up the bag, slowly opening it, a question rising inside me that I still didn't dare answer honestly. That evening, I went to meet Lu Chen for dinner as planned. The meal went pleasantly. He talked about his time studying abroad, occasionally offering suggestions on a few details I needed to fix in my project drawings. While explaining a tricky technique, Lu Chen absent-mindedly reached across the table and took my hand to point directly at the drawing on my phone. The completely innocent gesture left me a little flustered, but I didn't think much of it. Right at that moment, I happened to glance up and caught sight of a familiar figure standing just outside the restaurant's glass window. Xu Feng stood there, his eyes locked on the sight of Lu Chen holding my hand, his face draining of color for one brief instant. I quickly pulled my hand back, about to stand up and explain, but Xu Feng had already turned and walked away fast before I could get a word out. I apologized to Lu Chen and rushed after him, my heart pounding with worry that he'd misread the whole thing. I caught up with Xu Feng at a corner near the restaurant, breathless, calling his name to explain that it had all been a misunderstanding. Xu Feng stopped walking but didn't turn to look at me, his voice ice-cold as he said there was no need to explain. Who I liked was my own business. Those words cut deeper than any harsh argument we'd ever had before. I stood there watching his back disappear into the dark, unsure whether to chase after him or just let him go. In the days that followed, Xu Feng's attitude toward me changed completely. He no longer kept track of my schedule the way he used to, no longer made coffee in the mornings, and even the familiar little complaints whenever I left my things scattered around had vanished. That cold, quiet distance made the air in the room feel more suffocating than any argument ever had. I realized just how used I'd grown to Xu Feng's silent attentiveness, and how hollow it felt now that it had suddenly disappeared. One evening, I deliberately struck up a conversation about our upcoming group assignment, hoping to find an excuse to break the tension that had lingered for days. Xu Feng answered with only a few clipped words before turning back to his computer screen in silence. I sat there staring at his back, an inexplicable emptiness rising in my chest. The more I tried to think of ways to fix things, the more I realized I didn't want to keep living in this distance with Xu Feng for even one more day. That night I lay awake, tossing and turning, glancing sideways toward Xu Feng's bed through the dim darkness of the room. To my surprise, I found his eyes open too, wide awake, not asleep at all as I'd assumed. We both lay there in silence for a long while, neither of us willing to break the strange stillness of the night. I sighed quietly and turned away, wondering if Xu Feng was lying awake over the exact same thing keeping me up. The next morning, I decided to take the first step and break the ice, asking Xu Feng to shoot some hoops with me after class like we used to, before everything got so complicated. Xu Feng looked at me for a long moment, a flicker of surprise crossing his face at the sudden invitation. He finally nodded in agreement, though his voice still carried a trace of hesitant distance that hadn't fully faded. We played together for nearly an hour, the atmosphere gradually warming up a little, though neither of us brought up Lu Chen. On the way back to the dorm, I took a gamble and asked outright if he was jealous of Lu Chen. Xu Feng stopped mid-step, fell silent for a long moment, then simply said he didn't want to talk about it, his tone unmistakably evasive. I didn't push further, but deep down I already had my own answer. Watching the tips of his ears turn red under the streetlight, I knew for certain the feelings between us had long since crossed the line of ordinary roommates. That weekend, our class threw a joint birthday party for a few classmates born the same month, held at a small bar near school. I hadn't planned on drinking much, but the emotional turmoil of the past few days had me downing drink after drink just to escape my own thoughts. Xu Feng sat beside me the entire time, not saying much but never leaving my side either, occasionally sliding a glass of water toward me as a quiet reminder. I ignored it and kept drinking, wanting nothing more than to forget the suffocating feeling that had clung to me for days. By the end of the night, I was too drunk to stand and ended up collapsing straight into Xu Feng's lap without realizing it. In my hazy, drunken state, I looked up at him and blurted out whether he liked Lu Chen more or hated me more, forcing him to choose between the two. Xu Feng went still for a second at the unexpected question, his arm tightening around my shoulders. The dim bar lighting cast a rare seriousness across his face, a stark contrast to the coldness he'd been forcing all these past days. Xu Feng leaned in closer, his voice hoarse as he said he'd never once hated me. He just didn't know any other way to say it right. The words came out quiet but clear, cutting straight through the drunken fog clouding my mind. I thought it was a confession, my heart racing out of control. Just as I opened my mouth to respond, Xu Feng had already stood up, scooped me into his arms, and quietly carried me out of the bar on his back without another word. On the way back to the dorm, I rested my head against Xu Feng's back, half conscious, still trying to repeat the question from earlier, wanting to hear him confirm it once more for certain. But Xu Feng just kept walking in silence, not answering any of my mumbled words. I drifted off somewhere along the way without realizing it, only aware of the steady rhythm of his footsteps and the familiar warmth of the back carrying me, feeling safe enough to sink into a deep, dreamless sleep. I woke up the next morning with my head pounding from the hangover. I tried to piece together what had happened, meaning to ask Xu Feng about his answer from the night before, but he was already up early, studying as if nothing had happened. I brought it up hesitantly, and Xu Feng just glanced up and said flatly that I'd been drunk and talking nonsense, not to take it to heart. That cold reply snuffed out the hope that had just started flickering inside me. I sat up angrily in bed, feeling as if I'd been deceived all over again after having laid my heart bare. I lashed out at Xu Feng, calling him someone who toyed with other people's feelings, never once thinking about how much it could hurt. Xu Feng sat there quietly, not defending himself at all, just staring down at the book in front of him. That silent endurance only fueled my anger further, though at the same time, something about his reaction felt off. Finally, Xu Feng just said quietly, "Fine, think whatever you want," then stood up, grabbed his jacket, and walked out, leaving me alone with my unspent anger. I watched the door close behind him, a vague sense of regret rising unexpectedly in my chest. I sank down onto my bed, wondering why every argument with Xu Feng left me feeling worse instead of better. It was completely different from any fight we'd had before, leaving me even more confused about my own feelings. That afternoon, a classmate sitting beside me during group study brought up Xu Feng out of nowhere, saying that in 3 years of college, they'd never seen him genuinely close to anyone besides me, not even classmates he'd known since freshman year. I listened without responding, doubt beginning to creep into my own judgment over everything that had happened. Maybe Xu Feng's coldness wasn't indifference at all, just his own clumsy way of protecting himself. That night, the whole group stayed late at the lab working on the project. I borrowed Xu Feng's laptop to print some documents in a hurry and accidentally saw a message he'd left open, sent to his younger sister, mentioning an annoying roommate he just couldn't bring himself to hate. I skimmed through the lines and realized he was talking about me in his own awkward, guarded way. I quickly closed the screen, my heart racing as I understood that all his cold behavior had really just been a way of hiding his own confusion. I planned to find Xu Feng that night and clear everything up, sweep away all the misunderstandings that had piled up between us. But just as I stepped out of the lab, I saw a new notice posted at the department entrance about the next round of the study abroad scholarship. I read the notice carefully and discovered both Xu Feng and I had made it onto the shortlist for the final interview round this time, having both submitted applications at the start of the semester, without knowing the other had applied too. The news stopped me cold in the hallway, a frightening thought forming in my head. If one of us passed, that person would have to spend a full year studying abroad, meaning complete separation from the life we currently had together. I stood frozen in front of the notice board for a long time, a fear rising in my chest stronger than any fear of failing the scholarship itself had ever been. For the first time, I realized I was more afraid of losing Xu Feng than of failing this exam. I hurried back to the lab to find Xu Feng and clear up the scholarship situation, but the room was already dark, empty. He'd gone back before me without my noticing. I stood outside the door for a moment, my heart burning with the urge to see him right away. My phone buzzed, a text from Xu Feng, letting me know he'd already headed back to the room, telling me to finish up and come back soon so I wouldn't catch a cold. That plain, ordinary message eased my anxiety somewhat amid the chaos in my head. On the way back to the dorm, I walked past the quiet, empty campus, my mind still tangled with thoughts about the scholarship and the confusing feelings I'd been carrying for Xu Feng all this time. I stopped under a familiar tree and took a deep breath. I made up my mind then and there, no matter what the scholarship results turned out to be, I had to tell Xu Feng my true feelings before it became too late to fix anything. That resolve steadied my steps considerably as I continued back to the room. Back in the room, I found Xu Feng sitting at his desk, a cup of hot tea in hand, staring out the window with an unusually pensive look. I sat down on my bed, meaning to say something, but hesitated, unsure where to even begin. Xu Feng suddenly spoke first, asking if I'd seen the scholarship notice yet. I nodded, and the two of us fell into a long silence, neither of us saying anything more, only the ticking of the clock breaking the quiet. Finally, I gathered my courage, ready to say what I really felt right then and there. But before I could get a word out, Xu Feng's phone rang with an urgent call from his family, and he shot up to answer it, his expression growing tense by the second. I watched the rare look of worry on Xu Feng's face, a bad feeling settling in my gut that something had gone wrong. The conversation I'd been building up to had to wait, replaced instead by a new unease creeping in between us. Xu Feng had only gotten a few words into the call before his face turned pale, his voice breaking as he asked to have things repeated over and over. When he hung up, he stood frozen in the middle of the room for a long while, still gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. I asked, worried, what had happened. Xu Feng took a deep breath and answered quietly, trying to keep his voice steady. His father had fallen at a construction site and needed to be hospitalized immediately, and his mother back home didn't have enough money to cover the hospital bill right away. That night, Xu Feng sat at his desk for a long time, not opening his books like usual, just staring at his phone, calculating something over and over. I caught a glimpse of a spreadsheet on his screen. He was scrambling to figure out how to send money home fast. The next morning, I discovered Xu Feng had quietly withdrawn his scholarship interview application and signed up for a night shift at a restaurant near school instead. He hadn't said a word to me about the decision. I only found out by chance, spotting the withdrawal form left on his desk. I picked up the withdrawal form, frustrated that Xu Feng had made such a decision entirely on his own without discussing it with me first. I waited for him to come back from work and stood right in front of the door, demanding an explanation. Seeing the form in my hand, Xu Feng just sighed and said his family needed the money urgently. The scholarship could wait until next year. No need to make a big deal of it. That casual answer only made me angrier at his willingness to just endure it. I told him firmly not to make decisions like this on his own. I could help him cover the hospital costs for now, so he wouldn't have to give up such an important interview opportunity. Xu Feng shook his head immediately, his refusal firm and unwavering. I kept pressing, saying this was just friends helping each other out in hard times, nothing to be embarrassed about. But Xu Feng only replied curtly that he didn't want to owe anyone anything, not even me, and turned to walk into the bathroom, ending the conversation. I stood outside the bathroom door, listening to the sound of running water inside, still stewing over Xu Feng's stubbornness. I understood he didn't want to appear weak in front of me, but his harsh refusal still made me feel pushed away. I sank down onto my bed, replaying every small thing Xu Feng had quietly done for me all this time. The more I thought about it, the more frustrated I felt at not being able to do anything in return, not even once, to help carry his burden. That night my phone rang too, a call from my father. He brought up my older brother who'd won the same exchange scholarship years ago, his tone full of expectation that this time I couldn't afford to fall short of my accomplished brother. I held back a sigh, answered a few perfunctory words, and hung up quickly. Sitting alone in the dark, I suddenly realized both Xu Feng and I were carrying our own family burdens, ones neither of us had ever truly shared with the other until now. I stepped out onto the balcony to get some air, trying to shake off the suffocating feeling that had risen in my chest. Not long after, Xu Feng came out too, standing beside me without a word, just quietly staring out at the dark courtyard below the dorm. I found myself blurting out the whole story about my father's call earlier, about the pressure of living up to my brother that I'd never dared tell anyone. Xu Feng turned to look at me, listening carefully to every word, without interrupting or offering any hollow comfort. After hearing me out, Xu Feng told me about failing to win an important scholarship back in high school, all because his family couldn't afford to submit the application in time. He spoke calmly, but I could still catch a trace of lingering bitterness in his words, even after all these years. He turned and looked straight at me, saying that no matter the outcome, the effort put in was never meaningless. Those words struck right at the wound I'd been carrying quietly for so long, and my nose stung with tears I couldn't hold back. I broke down crying right there on the balcony, years of pent-up resentment finally spilling out, impossible to control. Xu Feng fumbled for a moment before reaching out to drape an arm around my shoulder, offering no flowery words of comfort, just standing quietly beside me, letting me lean against him. I cried until my chest felt light, finally releasing everything I'd kept hidden for so long. Xu Feng stayed patient the whole time, occasionally patting my shoulder gently, as if telling me he'd stay right there until I calmed down completely. Once I'd settled down, Xu Feng said quietly that I didn't need to be better than anyone. To him, I was already more than enough. That simple sentence soothed a wound I'd kept hidden for so long, and I found myself leaning my head against his shoulder, unwilling to move away. That night, for the first time, I let Xu Feng see my true vulnerability without forcing myself to seem fine. I thought to myself that maybe it was time I stepped up to help him too, whether he wanted it or not. After that night on the balcony, I quietly started planning ways to help Xu Feng without letting him know. I messaged around every student group chat I could find, looking for tutoring gigs or well-paying part-time jobs that might fit his schedule. At the same time, I kept racing to prepare my documents and files for the upcoming scholarship interview. The pressure from both directions had me staying up night after night, only managing a few short hours of sleep each day. On the day of the midterm project defense, I stood before the evaluation panel to present the most important part of the semester. My head was spinning from prolonged sleep deprivation, the words on my slides blurring before my eyes for no clear reason. Midway through the presentation, I felt the whole room start to spin violently. Before I could react, I collapsed right in front of the panel, the sound of the room's startled murmurs fading into a distant blur before I lost consciousness completely. I woke up in the school infirmary, the harsh white light making me squint for a moment before my eyes adjusted. The first thing I felt was a hand gripping mine tightly, holding on so hard it nearly hurt, refusing to let go. I turned my head and saw Xu Feng sitting beside the bed, his eyes red as if he'd been crying, an expression of panic I'd never seen on his face before. The moment he saw my eyes open, he gripped my hand even tighter, his voice choked, unable to speak right away. The doctor came in to check on me, diagnosing severe exhaustion from prolonged sleep deprivation and stress, requiring at least a full week of complete rest, absolutely no staying up late or strenuous activity during that time. Xu Feng immediately asked the doctor for every detail about how to take care of me, carefully noting it all down on his phone as if afraid of missing a single thing. I lay there watching him focus so intently on writing it all down, a feeling of being cared for and safe rising in me like never before. Back at the dorm, Xu Feng immediately took time off from class to look after me full-time. He cooked porridge with his own hands, timed my medication doses precisely, and even quit his night shift job entirely just to stay by my bedside. I told him, feeling guilty, that he didn't need to go to such lengths. I could manage on my own. But Xu Feng just brushed it off, his tone firm and leaving no room for argument, saying it was his turn to take care of me now, and I wasn't allowed to refuse his help. On my second day recovering, Lu Chen came by to visit, carrying a small bouquet of flowers and some fresh fruit. He'd barely stepped close to the door when Xu Feng blocked him immediately, standing squarely in the doorway, refusing to let him take another step. Xu Feng told him plainly, his tone cold but polite, that I needed complete quiet to rest and wasn't up for visitors right now. Lu Chen looked a little taken aback by the firm stance and ended up leaving the flowers with Xu Feng to pass along before he left. I overheard the entire exchange through the slightly open door, feeling touched and irritated at the same time by Xu Feng's somewhat excessive behavior. When he came back inside, I mildly scolded him for not having the right to decide who I could see. Xu Feng stood silent for a moment before answering seriously, saying he didn't want anyone else to see me this vulnerable except him. Those words made my heart race, though outwardly I still tried to look annoyed. That night, I pretended to be fast asleep to observe Xu Feng's real reactions. He sat in the chair by the bed, never once letting go of my hand, occasionally dozing off against the edge of the bed before jolting awake to check my temperature. He stayed like that all night, never once leaving my side, even as exhaustion from days of caring for me without proper sleep clearly wore him down. I lay there watching, my heart so warm I almost started crying. The next morning, I woke up for real and found Xu Feng had fallen asleep slumped against the edge of the bed, still gripping my hand tightly after holding on through the whole night. Looking at his face, rarely this relaxed while he slept, I found myself reaching out to gently brush the messy hair off his forehead. That tender gesture startled Xu Feng awake instantly, right as he caught me in the act. We both froze, staring at each other in silence, our faces flushed, neither able to say a word at such an intimate closeness. Xu Feng quickly pulled his hand back and stood up, pretending to go get water to hide his obvious embarrassment. I turned my head away too, my heart racing out of control, unable to look directly at him again. The room stayed unusually awkward for the rest of the morning. Both of us kept busy with our own things, avoiding eye contact, though clumsy stolen glances kept happening anyway across the small distance of the room. By noon, my phone buzzed with a new email notification from the academic office. My hand trembled slightly as I opened it. The first line read a congratulations. I had officially been accepted into the year-long exchange scholarship program abroad. I quickly checked further and found Xu Feng's name wasn't on the acceptance list this round. The joy that had just sparked inside me instantly died out, replaced by a growing unease at the thought of being away from Xu Feng for an entire year. I hesitantly handed my phone over for Xu Feng to see, unsure whether to feel happy or sad about the result. Xu Feng stared at the screen for a long moment, then forced a smile and congratulated me, his voice trying to sound cheerful, though a flicker of sadness he couldn't quite hide passed through his eyes. I noticed the forced smile immediately, my chest tightening with both affection and guilt. I wanted to say something to reassure him, but every word suddenly felt meaningless in the face of the separation looming ahead of us. That night I lay awake, tossing and turning, my mind spinning with a tangle of conflicting thoughts. Part of me wanted to seize this precious scholarship opportunity, while another part just wanted to stay by Xu Feng's side, unwilling to leave him even for a day. I glanced over at the next bed and saw Xu Feng lying there too, his back turned to me, clearly not asleep despite how late it was. We both lay awake in silence, neither of us brave enough to break the fragile distance between us in the dark. The next morning, Xu Feng spoke up first, asking if I'd decided whether to accept the scholarship yet. I hesitated, unsure how to answer, and just said vaguely that I was still weighing my options before making a final decision. Xu Feng nodded, gently advising me to seize the opportunity, not to let it slip away for any reason. But I could clearly see something unspoken in his eyes, a hidden sadness lurking behind that seemingly casual advice. That afternoon, I decided I couldn't put it off any longer. I texted Xu Feng, asking him to meet me on the dorm rooftop that night, determined to finally lay out all my true feelings before having to make any more important decisions. Xu Feng texted back agreeing, promising to be there right at 9. I spent the whole afternoon preparing myself mentally, both nervous and resolute, knowing that tonight's conversation would decide the path ahead for both of us. Right at 9, I went up to the dorm rooftop as planned, carrying all the words I'd rehearsed the entire afternoon. The night wind blew strong. I stood leaning against the railing, my eyes fixed on the stairwell, waiting for that familiar figure to appear. 9:15 came and went, then 9:30, and Xu Feng still hadn't shown up. I called over and over, but it just kept ringing before cutting off, no response at all from the other end, unease starting to settle in my chest. By 9:45, I was still standing alone on the empty rooftop, worry starting to overtake the earlier anticipation. I kept texting, but the messages stayed stuck as undelivered, as if his phone had died completely. Unable to wait any longer, I rushed back down to check the room and found Xu Feng's bed empty, his things exactly as they'd been that morning. I called his classmates, but no one knew where he was at this hour. In the middle of my panic, my phone suddenly rang, an unknown number. The voice on the other end was a stranger, informing me that Xu Feng had just been in a minor traffic accident near the school gate and was being rushed to the nearest hospital. I froze for a few seconds before I could react, my hands shaking as I grabbed my jacket and bolted out the door, racing down the stairs without waiting for the elevator, my mind fixed on one single thought: getting to Xu Feng right now. Rushing into the hospital, I found Xu Feng sitting on the bed, one arm carefully bandaged, a few small scratches on his face. What stopped me cold was that he was still clutching a familiar bag of food tight against his chest, refusing to let go even while injured. I rushed to his bedside, my voice shaking as I asked why he'd been out riding at this hour without telling me. Xu Feng gave a weak smile, answering that he just wanted to quickly run out and buy one more parting gift before I left for my year abroad. I looked at the bag still clutched in Xu Feng's hand, realizing it was full of my favorite snacks. Tears spilled out before I could stop them, and I sank down beside the hospital bed, gripping his uninjured hand tightly. I choked out, straight out, that I didn't want to go abroad anymore if it meant being apart from him for an entire year. The words came out without any planning, as if they'd been pent up and waiting to be said for a long time. Xu Feng froze at my words, his eyes widening with a mix of surprise and worry. He gripped my hand tighter, urging me seriously not to give up such a precious opportunity for his sake. He could wait, no matter how long it took. I shook my head firmly, insisting this was entirely my own decision, not out of pity or any pressure from him. Xu Feng stayed silent, studying me for a long moment, as if trying to confirm the sincerity behind every word I'd just said. I took a deep breath and finally confessed the truth I'd kept hidden for so long, that I'd liked Xu Feng for a long time now, not just seen him as some annoying roommate the way I always claimed out loud. Xu Feng went still for a moment, his eyes shining with emotion he couldn't hide. He repeated my words back as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard, his voice trembling as he asked again, just to be sure he hadn't misheard anything. I nodded firmly, no hesitation left in me at all. Xu Feng squeezed my hand almost to the point of pain, then gently pulled me closer, our foreheads touching in a breathless closeness within the quiet hospital room. He whispered a confession that he'd liked me since the very day the freshman year scholarship results were announced, having seen the disappointment on my face back then but never daring to get close, afraid it would look like pity for the person who'd just beaten him. I laughed through the tears still lingering on my cheeks, realizing that for all these years, We'd both been quietly misunderstanding each other out of stubborn pride. If either of us had just spoken up back then, things might have turned out so differently. Xu Feng laughed along with me, his eyes soft, never leaving mine. We sat there together in the hospital room, hands still clasped tight, letting the tears and laughter mix and flow, as if finally releasing every ounce of pent-up emotion we'd carried for so long. Using his good hand, Xu Feng dug through his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, gear-shaped badge from the freshman year project club, the one we'd both joined together before becoming scholarship rivals. He held it out for me to see. Xu Feng explained it was the badge he'd kept since the very first club meeting where we first met, quietly holding onto it for 3 years as a personal keepsake, back before he'd even dared admit to the feelings slowly growing inside him. Xu Feng gently pinned the badge onto my collar, his hand still trembling slightly from the unhealed injury. He said it was a promise that he'd always wait for me, no matter how far apart we'd be for a whole year in a foreign land. I looked down at the small badge glinting on my chest, a warmth I couldn't quite describe filling my heart. I took his hand and nodded quietly, silently promising myself I'd come back on time, not make him wait too long. A few days later, I contacted the academic office to request deferring my scholarship spot to the next term, citing the need for more time to prepare my personal documents before departing. The staff agreed, noted my request, and scheduled a review for the next round. I went back and told Xu Feng the news. He asked, surprised, why I'd make such a decision when the opportunity was already in hand. I smiled and said I wanted us both to qualify so we could go together. I didn't want to walk that path alone anymore. Hearing that, Xu Feng threw himself into studying seriously, signing up for an evening English course to prepare his documents for the next scholarship round. I used the time to help tutor him every night too, both of us sitting at the same desk again like before. The atmosphere in the room now was completely different from the tense standoff of freshman year. We still bickered over little things about studying, but now every argument ended with a gentle handhold making peace. One weekend evening, the two of us took a walk around campus after our evening class, the crisp chill of the first winter since officially being together brushing pleasantly against our faces. Xu Feng draped an extra jacket over me, his hand naturally finding mine and holding on. I looked up at the star-filled night sky, my heart at peace in a way so different from the turbulent days behind us. Xu Feng squeezed my hand gently, saying that no matter how many challenges lay ahead, as long as we had each other, we'd get through anything easily. Standing under the familiar hallway light of the dorm, the very place where everything between us had begun with a misunderstood photo, Xu Feng pulled me into a tight embrace. He whispered against my ear that from now on, neither of us would ever have to walk alone again. I rested my head against Xu Feng's shoulder, smiling quietly in the peace of the moment. Our story had started with a foolish misunderstanding, weathered countless arguments and hurts, and finally found its way back to each other, whole and certain. Maybe the saddest part isn't ever mistakenly hating someone. It's taking far too long to realize that person had quietly been on your side all along. Some misunderstandings only need one honest explanation to clear up, but others can nearly cost two people each other forever. If you were in you, after learning the truth about that scholarship all those years ago, could you truly forgive Xu Feng? Or would that old wound still be something you could never quite let go of?